Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meets President Trump at the White House as the US ramps up pressure for a Gaza ceasefire deal. President Trump turns up the heat on trade, sending tariff warning letters to 14 countries while extending the deadline to the 1st of August. French President Emmanuel Macron kicks off a state visit to the UK, blending royal ceremony with tough talks on migration and Ukraine. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with US President Donald Trump at the White House as talks to end the Gaza war continue. Trump expressed optimism about a ceasefire, saying Hamas want to meet for peace. Netanyahu, meanwhile, said he's working with the US on plans to relocate Palestinians out of Gaza. During one of their meetings, Netanyahu presented Trump with a Nobel Peace Prize nomination. Let's take a listen.
The President has an extraordinary team, and I think our teams together make an extraordinary combination to meet challenges and seize opportunities. But the President has already realized great opportunities. He forged the Abraham Accords. He's forging peace as we speak in one country and one region after the other. So I want to present to you, Mr. President, the letter I sent to the Nobel Prize Committee. It's nominating you for the Peace Prize, which is well-deserved, and you should get it.
Thank you very much. This I didn't know. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Coming from you in particular, this is very meaningful. Thank you very much, baby.
Thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you. It's a great honor.
For more on this, I'm joined by Dr. Shuki Friedman, Vice President of the Jewish People Policy Institute. Great to have you on the show again. President Donald Trump and Netanyahu took a victory lap to celebrate their recent strikes on Iran, but the Gaza war continues to loom large as the state visit does continue.
Yeah, definitely. I think in a way, historic meeting and a visit of Netanyahu to the White House today, yesterday, maybe tomorrow, and there is another meeting this evening, actually mark a new peak in the relations between Israel and the United States. It was celebrating the first time that these two countries attacked in Iran together, attacked anywhere together, and they're celebrating the tremendous achievement in Iran. It's true that Gaza is not solved yet, and while they are meeting in DC and the White House, the delegations in Qatar are negotiating on a deal on Gaza, and it's clear that it will take some more days and it will be tough because Israel is looking to actually demolish Hamas and take it off power in Gaza, while Hamas was trying to remain on power and using the hostages as a card for his gains. So we will look forward to the meeting this evening with President Trump and Netanyahu to see whether there will be a breakthrough in Gaza, but also we have to remember that on the agenda there's Iran that still continue to seek a nuclear weapon, and next week there will be an opening of a new circle of negotiation with Iran and the United States, and it seems that Netanyahu and Trump seeking to preserve the achievements they had by the attack in Iran while they're going and continuing this negotiation.
So, Doctor, Israel's defense minister has announced plans to move Gaza's population to a camp in the southern city of Rafah. Is this a forcible transfer of an occupied territory's civilian population, which is against international humanitarian law?
Basically, whatever Israel is doing in Gaza Strip, based on humanitarian law and by the Geneva Convention, fourth Geneva Convention, Article 78, not a permanent, but a temporary transfer of a population for the sake of protecting or attacking militants and militias within occupied territories is eligible, and therefore it's lawful. It's really depend on how we do it and what the purpose. And the purpose here is to protect these civilians from being hit by the fight against Hamas and actually reduce number of the civilians involved and been hurt by casualties that caused by the attacks of Hamas against Israel and retaliation by Israel.
But there's even a humanitarian lawyer from Israel today who has denounced these plans. But I just want to move on to something else. This announcement comes after the meeting between Trump and Netanyahu we've just been discussing, where they once again discussed turning Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East. That's despite Arab states not backing this plan. Is the US and Israel still pushing this agenda?
In my perspective, the question is, and it's a crucial question, whether any Gazan will remove from Gaza forcefully. I believe that this is not legal, and therefore, if Gaza will decide to move from Gaza to another state, and they have the freedom of transfer to everywhere they want and willing to accept them, that will be a potential solution for part of the Gazan, but still, I think the idea of this Riviera, whatever it would be to renovate Gaza, which is crucial for the Gazans themselves. I think that if you watch the TV and the picture from Gaza, you see that large portions of Gaza being demolished by the war, by Hamas, and therefore, if it be possible to renovate Gaza for the sake of the Gazans and for the sake of the region, it will be a tremendous thing to do for the Gazans itself.
Qatar has said more time was needed for negotiations for a Gaza ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, as you also said earlier. Is Donald Trump right to be so optimistic about a possible breakthrough and a possible ceasefire?
No, it's really hard to tell. We went through uncountable circles of negotiation in Qatar between Hamas and Israel. And by the time the passing, the risk to the hostages is growing, and Israel is seeking to release them from Hamas. So the potential is larger today. The fact that Netanyahu and Trump are all together now in DC, getting more meeting to get today, raising the potential that something will happen. But it's really hard to tell because there are different reports from within the negotiation rooms. Whether there is any potential for next day's breakthrough or it's take more time.
And France's President Emmanuel Macron has just been addressing the Houses of Parliament in the UK. He's currently there on a state visit. I just want to read to you some lines that he did say during that speech. He said, "The recognition of State of Palestine is the only way to build peace in the region." What do you make of what Emmanuel Macron has been saying to the Houses of Parliament?
The only way to bring peace to the Middle East, and I think we also going to see a breakthrough in the Abraham Accord, maybe with Syria, maybe Saudi Arabia, is to have a solution to the Palestinians that will enable Israel to live in safe borders as a Jewish state. And a potential solution might be one day two-state solution, but recognition of a Palestinian state today will bring nothing to the Palestinians because, in fact, Israel is still in power in the West Bank, and we seek a solution that will enable Israel to be sure and be completely confident that the Palestinians are not going to attack it through the West Bank as they've done from Gaza. So basically, two-state solution is a potential future solution for the crisis and for the century conflict, but forcing this solution would not bring it to an end.
Dr. Shuki Friedman, thank you for your insights and for joining the show. I'm now being joined by Dr. Sabri Sidum, Deputy Secretary General of Fatah Central Committee. Thank you so much for joining us. Hamas has confirmed that it is discussing the US-Qatar ceasefire proposal with other Palestinian factions. Is Fatah holding talks with Hamas on the agreement in place at the moment?
Well, it's good to be with you. No, the short answer is no. There's no talks, no direct talks with Hamas, but certainly there's talks with the interlocutors in the Middle East, definitely the Qataris, the Egyptians, and most importantly, contact with the Americans to assess the situation as it were. And we were hoping that the culmination of the discussion would surface during the Netanyahu-Trump meeting, in which we were told that Trump was very close to announcing a ceasefire. It looks like there's last-minute hiccups that delayed such a process.
So you're hopeful that a ceasefire will come into place through the discussions that you've been having. Is there any more you can tell us what's holding up the ceasefire being announced?
Well, let me say, just to clarify, that we have not been holding any direct discussions. As you know, I did say that we're in discussion with the interlocutor to assess the situation and see as to where the discussion has taken us. But indeed, yes, we are quite encouraged by the optimism that prevailed so far. We would like to see a cessation of hostilities, and we'd like to see anything that saves our people's lives. So what's holding this back is maybe last-minute hiccups, as I said, that are manifesting themselves by the lack or the impotence of the American administration will to reveal a plan to basically address the day after. And Israel's inability to answer big questions such as the flow of goods and support and the reconstruction material for Gaza, and also who rules Gaza, which remains to be the big question at hand.
Earlier, I was discussing Israel's defense minister announcing plans to move Gaza's population to a camp in the southern city of Rafah. Now, what do you make of these plans to build what my guest was saying to me earlier, a humanitarian city to help the people of Gaza? Do you agree with the sentiments?
Imagine, would the Palestinian ever agree to such a sentiment? This is nothing but really getting more into the mud. Israel is basically committing war crimes. It is insisting on committing yet more crimes by displacing Palestinians, by deciding the type of oxygen Palestinians are to breathe, and by dividing Palestine in such a manner that even Netanyahu and Trump were rejoicing last night by saying to each other that, yes, we will displace Palestinians. Yes, we have talked to partners in the region, rather, and some of them are willing to displace Palestinians. And yes, they're continuing with their Riviera project. So if anything, Israel is getting more and more into the mud of the scene. And Trump is not helping. Trump in every way is aiding Netanyahu, is supporting Netanyahu. And to add this to this misery is the fact that Netanyahu is nominating the fugitive from the criminal court, is the International Criminal Court rather, is nominating Trump to the basically the Nobel Prize. What kind of a prize is this, where a fugitive is nominating the person who's providing him with weaponry and providing him with decision to continue with this war? It is a shamble, it is a disgrace, and this is nothing but a manifestation of the insistence of the two to play a role that is devilish, that is full of intention to destroy Palestinian aspirations and dreams.
So more than 57,500 people have been killed in Gaza since the attack on the 7th of October that was carried out by Hamas. How much longer can Palestinian parties like Fatah continue to allow the people to suffer? Why aren't you doing enough?
Well, let me say that this was not our making, as you know, and as you pointed out to it. And we have been, since day one, trying to pressure all parties to end the hostilities, to save the Palestinian blood, and also to salvage what remains of Gaza. But indeed, Netanyahu has other ideas. Remember, the 7th of October was in every way possible for Netanyahu an excuse to continue with his earlier plan. This did not come into being all of a sudden. He's been planning for 30 years the issue of displacing Palestinians, and he's doing that in the West Bank, by the way, not only in Gaza, and the issue of exterminating Palestinian presence on the geography of Palestine. So what is happening is an implementation of a much bigger project. This is not a war that's being settled. This is not a revenge that's being paid. It's rather a plan that is fixated on the idea of eliminating Palestinians, of changing the Middle East, as Netanyahu has repeatedly announced, and drawing plans that are in every way possible conducive to the prevalence of the plan of the right-wing parties of Israel to see no Palestinians and to continue to rule the Middle East on the basis of commercial merit, of continuation of the State of Israel on the blood and flesh of Palestinians at large.
Doctor, there's a question that I want to ask you. I want to say, you were saying that there's nothing in place for the day after the ceasefire. And this is a big concern when it comes to these talks between the US, Israel, Hamas, indirect talks or direct talks. What is your party calling for the day after the ceasefire happens? What is your solution to end this war and to save the Palestinian people?
Well, our solution has come handy. We have formulated a plan. We have presented the plan to the Arab Summit last March. It was approved by the Arab Summit. It was then taken to the Muslim countries. It was approved by the League of Muslim Countries. And it was welcomed initially, at least by the American administration, only to see Netanyahu have other ideas. Netanyahu resumed the war back on the 18th of March and decided to basically turn the table upside down. So he has destroyed the plan and is now saying no to a Palestinian state, which was part of the plan, and no to the presence of the Palestinian Authority, which was part of the plan again. And there's no way he would accept, as he calls it, Hamasistan and Fathistan, meaning that he will never, ever entertain even the thought of Fatah being included in the discussion, let alone the plan to govern Gaza. So Netanyahu is to blame, and Netanyahu has destroyed such a plan. But we remain persistent and we remain adamant to see the plan being implemented, since we see it as the only formidable formula for the way forward.
Netanyahu would blame Hamas, but Dr. Sabri Saidam, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your insights. Now, US President Donald Trump is turning up the pressure on America's trading partners, sending tariff warning letters to 14 countries while extending the deadline for new reciprocal tariffs to the 1st of August. The letters outline steep new rates, some as high as 40% unless trade deals are reached. Major partners like Japan and South Korea say they are ready to negotiate. For more on this, I am joined from London by Carina Kamel, Al Arabiya's senior correspondent. Carina, thank you for joining us. Always great to have you on the show. The UN is warning today that Trump's decision to delay major tariff hikes prolongs global trade uncertainty. So how significant is this extension, and how are the markets reacting?
Well, if you take the announcement we heard over the last 24 hours from the U.S. President Donald Trump that the deadline, in fact, will not be tomorrow, Wednesday, the 9th of July, for the reinstatement of the higher tariffs, the reciprocal tariffs that he had initially announced on so-called Liberation Day, early April. So the extension of that deadline from tomorrow to the 1st of August, if you take that at face value, you could perhaps see why the United Nations is warning that this is indeed prolonging the uncertainty, because we have a longer period in which we don't really know what deals will be struck and what impact they will have on the respective economies and the trading relationships. But if you take the announcement in the context of the other announcements we've heard from Donald Trump since he came into office, and if we look at the market reaction, you could read this in a positive way because actually the market reaction has been positive. So all throughout the session in Europe, markets were fairly steady. Markets opened higher in the US. They're slightly weaker now, but generally speaking, investors have welcomed the news because they have seen this as a net positive. Because at the end of the day, what it means, there is not going to be a cliff edge in the next 24 hours, i.e. the 9th of July tomorrow. And all the countries that are engaged in negotiation with the United States right now have a longer period to reach an agreement. So markets are viewing this positively. Perhaps in the wider context, yes, it does prolong the uncertainty. But if you think about the fact that we are just living in an uncertain period and Donald Trump's presidency is itself very uncertain in different ways, if that's the kind of wider context, then this is a positive development and markets are indeed welcoming it.
And Trump singled out 14 countries in his letters. Why, Carina, these nations in particular? And what leverage does the US really have over them?
You know, it's a really interesting mix of countries. If you look at it at face value, as you mentioned in the introduction, you have some very large economies. Japan, one of the largest economies in the world, South Korea, South Africa, but you also have a lot of smaller nations. You have Bangladesh, you have Laos, you have countries like Bosnia, you have Indonesia. And you might think, why has he started with these 14 countries? We have been told by the US administration that they will be focusing on 18 countries that represent 85% of the trade deficit. Now, we know that Donald Trump likes to focus on the goods trade deficit, and he sees this deficit as an unfair or imbalanced relationship. We know that China is #1, so the largest trade deficit between the US and any other country is with China. We also have Mexico, Canada, the European Union. They're in the top 5, but all these other countries, 18 countries, the 14 that have received letters are amongst those top 18 in terms of trade deficit. And if we look at the overall deficit, Japan and South Korea are very near the top also. And in fact, if you look at some of the countries targeted in this first batch, over the last year, in 2024, annually, the trade deficit in goods has increased. So it's headed in the wrong direction as far as Donald Trump is concerned. These countries have a fair amount of leverage, but the fact of the matter is they rely on the U.S. market. So if you look at Japan, for example, just briefly, $148 billion is the amount of goods that Japan sent to the United States last year. So that's a really big hit for the Japanese economy. If you look at a smaller country like Bangladesh, which potentially faces 35% higher tariffs by the 1st of August, you might think, what is the impact for Bangladesh? What leverage does it have? Bangladesh relies on the U.S. market. 80% of Bangladesh's imports, the value of what it gets from its imports, a huge amount of that is coming from the United States. So if the U.S. market is cut off for some of these countries, it could be a huge negative impact for their economy. So I would say that the U.S. for some of these countries is in a very strong negotiating position.
And also, Carina, there's been concern that tariffs could raise prices for American consumers because, as we say, they are reciprocal a lot of the time. Should we expect to see those effects anytime soon? Or because of the delay, that's also not going to come into effect as feared at the beginning of the tariff situation and talks?
That is the million-dollar question. And even the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, has said that it's very difficult for the Fed to determine the impact of the tariffs on inflation. He has said very clearly there indeed will be an impact and inflation will be higher. How much higher and when is the question that the Fed itself is currently unable to answer. And perhaps what the UN was referring to was this uncertainty will continue and therefore monetary policy also will potentially be on hold. Now, given the current situation, the markets are not expecting the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates at its meeting later this month because it is uncertain, because it doesn't know the answer to your question. Markets are looking at a higher chance of an interest rate cut in September, about 60%, which is actually lower than it was a few weeks ago. So basically, the decision is harder for policymakers to determine the impact on inflation. The answer will depend to a large extent on how companies behave. So in this uncertainty, in this void, in this wait and see, how are companies going to behave? Are they going to, companies, for example, in the United States that rely on foreign imports, will they start stockpiling inventory ahead of the holiday period, for example? Will they start anticipatory price hikes ahead of potential tariff increases. How companies react, and each company will behave differently, will have an impact on the U.S. consumer. The other thing to mention as well is, what about the U.S. consumer? Will U.S. consumers themselves reduce their spending? And that's why we're watching data like retail sales, like consumer confidence. And if those indicators show us weakness, that the U.S. consumer is not spending or is delaying those spending decisions because they're worried that prices will go up in the future, so they better keep their discretionary spending down, that could also have a negative impact on U.S. activity.
Well, Carina, as we know, Donald Trump definitely wants Jerome Powell to cut those interest rates, so I'm sure that's another conversation we'll be having soon. Carina Kamel, Al Arabiya senior correspondent. Always great to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. The death toll from the catastrophic flash floods in Texas has passed 100, with that number expected to climb. Search and rescue teams have been working around the clock to try and find survivors. But as hopes fade, major questions are being asked about how this could happen, as correspondent Sara Firth reports.
The personal items and belongings of young campers strewn amidst broken buildings. This is what's left of Camp Mystic, the beloved children's summer camp left devastated by the deadly Texas flooding in what's been described as every parent's worst nightmare. The muddy mark on the wall showing just how high the water rose. A little wave and a small moment of hope amidst the devastation. Footage shows the Texas military forces evacuating a group of young campers. But they were the lucky ones. Camp Mystic says it's now grieving the loss of 27 campers and counsellors, asking for prayers for those still missing, saying, "Our hearts are broken." The water rose high and it rose fast, with the Guadalupe River rising to more than 20 feet in just a few hours. Infrared satellite images from Friday show the development of the thunderstorms that produced the heavy rainfall that ultimately caused the flash flooding that has so far killed upwards of 100 people, with the death toll expected to rise. Search and rescue teams are working day and throughout the night to try and find survivors.
Those operations involve 19 different local and state agencies. In addition to conducting primary and secondary searches, they will be conducting welfare checks on areas in North Kerr County impacted by power outages. And when we say search and rescue operations, that is boat, walking, on the ground, dogs, drones. Again, keep personal drones out of the air.
US President Donald Trump has said his administration was working with state and local officials on the ground. But major questions are now being asked, and allegations are being made that funding cuts to weather forecasting may have worsened the disaster. It's an allegation the White House has hit back on.
Unfortunately, in the wake of this once-in-a-generation natural disaster, we have seen many falsehoods pushed by Democrats such as Senator Chuck Schumer and some members of the media. Blaming President Trump for these floods is a depraved lie, and it serves no purpose during this time of national mourning.
An acknowledgement, though, from some officials that something went wrong and a better system of warnings will be needed. Eyewitness Tonya Fucci was visiting her grandmother near the river and described her shock at the swiftness of the water.
I'm still in shock today. The devastation was such that I'm still in shock today. And with the rescues going on and the helicopters, you just know there's so many missing children and missing people. You just want them to be found for the sakes of the families. But you know it's not going to be a good ending. It's just not going to be. There's no way people could have survived the swiftness of the water.
Texas right now, a state in grieving. Lighting candles, a vigil for those who died in the floods and for those still missing. A devastated community are left asking how something like this could happen. Sara Firth, Al Arabiya.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. The US plans to send new defensive weapons to Ukraine. This comes after the Pentagon halted the delivery of arms such as air missiles. US President Donald Trump said the new shipments will help Ukraine defend itself against intensifying Russian advances. The US is the largest single donor to Ukraine, sending over $66 billion in military aid since Russia launched its full-scale invasion in 2022. Now, Egypt's stock exchange suspended trading today after a deadly fire broke out in the telecom's data center in Cairo. The blaze disrupted internet access, phone calls and digital banking services. The fire, which is suspected to have been caused by an electrical short circuit, killed 4 workers and injured at least 22 others. Now, the first malaria treatment suitable for babies and very young children has been approved. The treatment is expected to be rolled out in African countries in the coming weeks. Children under the age of 5 account for 76% of all malaria-related deaths globally. Turning to sport, and it's day 9 of Wimbledon as the players battle it out at the All-England club to make the semis-finals. The last standing Briton in the tournament, Cameron Norrie, is currently facing defending champion Carlos Alcaraz. They are on court now, and Alcaraz is racing to a first set win against Norrie. Well, world number 1, Aryna Sabalenka, she actually won her game too. She was playing against Laura Siegemund, who took the first set, but Sabalenka roared back, winning the match and reaching the semi-finals. And on the other side of the men's draw, Taylor Fritz is the first player through to the singles men's semi-finals. So there we are, a couple of semi-finalists in Wimbledon. French President Emmanuel Macron and his wife have begun a 3-day state visit to the UK. They've been given a full royal welcome. They were greeted by Prince William and his wife when they landed, and the King and Queen are hosting the couple. Macron has just made a speech in Parliament and said the recognition of the state of Palestine is the only way to build peace in the region. For more on this, I'm joined from France by French senator and author Nathalie Goulet. Nathalie, a pleasure to have you on the show. So, Emmanuel Macron, as I said there, was given a full royal welcome, including a carriage procession and a guard of honour. Will King Charles help rebuild the UK-France relationship, as all the pomp and ceremony was definitely out today?
Obviously, yes, and thank you for having me on the program. Yes, obviously it's a very important visit, and I think it's a very important time for the friendship between UK and France, obviously.
So Macron has been addressing Parliament, migration and Ukraine high on the agenda. What did you make of his speech? Because it seemed to be like the plan is really for the UK and France to work together to protect international order.
Well, but, you know, in this very unpredictable time, I think that we need our ally, whatever is Brexit or not, but we need to recover this trust and work together with UK. And I think that we will have a very important summit tomorrow, which will also be very important. And obviously on Ukraine, but then on Palestine, Iran. I mean, we have so many disturbing time in so many areas that we need our neighbor next to us and work together.
And Nathalie, let's just talk a little bit more about Brexit. Did we get a sense of how President Macron views Britain's role in Europe after Brexit? This appears to be, like I said, about royal ceremony, but how heavily will politics feature in these discussions? Because this seems to be the rebuilding of UK-French relations after we did see the Brexit deal and the Boris Johnson government.
Yeah, but you know, the Brexit was not against France. The Brexit was against Europe. And if you look carefully to the result, whatever is with Europol, whatever is the judiciary cooperation, police cooperation, security cooperation, the level of understanding and the level of cooperation is still very high. So there is nothing broken between France and UK. It was a breach with the European Union and unfortunate, obviously.
So
I don't think it's nothing against France.
Oh, sorry to interrupt you. Well, thank you for clarifying that. But I just wanted to also ask you about migration. Now, this has been a really big topic within the UK and within France, because we see the rise of the far right. We've seen that in France and in the UK with the Reform Party. And migration has been a pretty big deal when it comes to political parties and the polls. Now, can the UK and France work together to tackle illegal migration and get the number of boats down?
Yeah, but you see the story on the side of those small boats, and we have a very high number this year for the 6 first months. But I would like to underline something that all the illegal migration, it's a criminality, and we have now 7 billion euro of money laundering and dirty money coming from those migrations. So in addition to be a human problem, a political issue, it's also a security issue. It's why we need absolutely to work together.
And President Trump is currently hosting Benjamin Netanyahu as they discuss a Gaza ceasefire deal. And today, Emmanuel Macron, while he was addressing Parliament, he said recognition of State of Palestine is the only way to build peace in the region. What do you make of Emmanuel Macron's comments? Is he correct?
Well, you know that he was planned to, he planned to make an announcement on June 18 in United Nations with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And one of a sudden, Netanyahu decided to bomb Iran. And then they postponed this meeting. But something is definitely in the pipe for some recognition. Sooner or later, it will come. It's in the mind of our president and for the two-state solution. But then you remember what happened around June 18. I don't think it's a fortuity. I think something happened because this announcement was planned. So I think he has this strong idea for recognition, yes.
And also, if we just have a look at the war between Russia and Ukraine, that is ongoing. Emmanuel Macron has been very firm in his stance to support Ukraine throughout this war. And he's also said that Europe will never abandon Ukraine. How are Europe actually going to stand in and give enough weapons to Ukraine? Because we know the US right now is probably the most important backer when it comes to Ukraine.
Well, but you see what happened with the President Trump. One day he's in, one day he's out. So we need some reliable solution, and I think that Europe will help. You know that we will increase the level of help and production of weapons, and I think that we have to be in accordance to what happened with UK on this subject, because it's a question of security for Europe, and then a question of legality and international law also. So I think that we will maintain this support for Ukraine.
And if I can just ask you, you know, we see Emmanuel Macron on the state visit to the UK. He's been heavily involved in the coalition of the willing, backing Ukraine. He's been on the international stage. But Natalie, things aren't good for Emmanuel Macron back at home in France, especially according to the polls. Do you think that his international presence has got more sway than his domestic presence?
Do we have 1 hour and a half to discuss about the subject? Sometimes a president that have like a export product, they are more popular abroad than inside. It's a very common thing. So if you remember, Obama was very, very popular abroad and not so popular inside the country. So it's something that may happen, but as a matter of result, we cannot say that we have so phenomenal result, whatever is Middle East, whatever is Iran, whatever is, we are on process. But I think there is a big difference between his popularity abroad and inside the country. And unfortunately, it's the case for a lot of presidents.
Another president or prime minister was Justin Trudeau. I always remember the Canadian Justin Trudeau, so popular abroad, but not very popular at home. Very good point. Yeah, you're completely right, Natalie. Natalie Goulet, I wish we had an hour and a half to talk about it, but sadly we are out of time. But it was absolutely brilliant to have you on the show.
Just one point, there is also a very, very important issue regarding fighting the financing of radical Islamism and the Muslim Brotherhood. And I think it will be on the table tomorrow between the two Ministers of Interior.
We heard it here first. Thank you so much, Natalie. A pleasure to have you on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you.
A reminder of our top stories. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meets President Trump at the White House as the US ramps up pressure for a Gaza ceasefire deal. President Trump turns up the heat on trade, sending tariff warning letters to 14 countries while extending the deadline to the 1st of August. French President Emmanuel Macron kicks off a state visit to the UK, blending royal ceremony with tough talks on migration and Ukraine. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on X. G&T with Tom Burgess-Watson is coming up next. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.